Citizen Vigilante is a 2026 movie written and directed by Uwe Boll and starring Armie Hammer as the titular vigilante who, as the tagline reads, takes justice into his own hands by hunting down criminals.
Hello. Come in.
The movie gained significant notoriety for its controversial depiction of violence against immigrants and for its subsequent embracement by MAGA people, the far right, and by those who don't identify as either but basically hold the same values. This is why Citizen Vigilante blew up. It taps into the rage millions of people feel when their government won't protect them or their kids. Millions of men in Western society are a very small step away from going full Citizen Vigilante. It's not a call to violence, it's a wake-up call. After the movie was banned in Germany, I mean, it wasn't actually banned, it was a rating issue, which apparently is not uncommon with violent movies in Germany, but still, after it was supposedly banned, Elon Musk stepped in to promote the movie on his platform, which increased its reach significantly. This is what people want to see, a vigilante who kills people who deserve it, unlike other woke movies who make men a bunch of pussies. Citizen Vigilante delivers the warning Western governments desperately need to hear. This is the moderate response. First the traitors, then the invaders. Yes. All this got me curious. What kind of movie are we actually dealing with here? Why is it that the far right and those adjacent to it have rallied around this one so passionately? After all, we're talking about Uwe Boll here, who is widely regarded as one of the worst filmmakers in cinema history, and who is mostly known for embarrassing video game adaptations and cynical exploitation flicks. Is this just another poorly made movie that has been blown out of proportion for vaguely depicting far-right interests, or is there actually more to it? And so I decided to check it out for myself, figuring I could do a quick review on my second channel, but then the movie turned out to be much stranger than I thought it would be, and much more revealing about the current psychological state of all those who support it, which made me realize that I needed to give this one some proper attention. And so here we go, Citizen Vigilante.
Thanks for the ticket, sir.
Just in case it wasn't already obvious, this is not a well-made movie. I don't want to spend too much time on the craft of it because that's obviously not what matters here, but very briefly because it does actually matter a little. Citizen Vigilante is ugly looking, poorly written and poorly edited, with lots of pacing issues and awkward intercutting between scenes. Like this sequence where the movie tries to do a montage that juxtaposes the bad guys arriving with the vigilante getting ready, but the execution is all wrong. There's no progression on either side, which means that we're constantly cutting back to the same handful of shots that make the whole thing feel static rather than dynamic. It also just goes on way too long, even after the music has already faded away, only to then unceremoniously end without any payoff or purpose.
Okay.
There's attempts at non-linear storytelling that constantly cut off the momentum of the individual scenes and which never results in any kind of twist or worthwhile subversion. There's also numerous logical shortcuts that undermine all sense of believability, most notably in the sequence where an entire SWAT team dumbly lines up in front of a fortified machine gun nest only to get gunned down like a bunch of unthinking NPCs. And worst of all, it's not even bad in a funny way, except maybe for this one moment during that SWAT takedown where the movie, which up until this point has depicted violence with some degree of grit and realism, suddenly shows a guy's head exploding into this insane fountain of blood after the vigilante shoots him in the face. No, aside from a few amusingly weird moments like this, Citizen Vigilante is mostly a drag to watch, with little narrative progression, no real stakes, and no real characters. So why does this matter a little? Because in the context in which the movie is currently being appreciated, I do think that the poor aesthetics and the general amateurish feel of it actually do work to the movie's favor, as it does reinforce that idea that this was made in defiance of the establishment, whatever that may be exactly. It reinforces the idea that Citizen Vigilante is some kind of underground rebellion uncovering that which they are afraid to show you, or even worse, that which they are actively hiding from you. This, of course, is also mainly what the movie is doing on a narrative level, which actually revolves less around committing violence and more about the vigilante ranting on social media, ranting to the cop who's chasing him, ranting to other bad guys, and even ranting to the victims he's avenging.
Is that the justice that you want?
It's honestly really tiresome, but the whole point is that this is a guy with a message, that this is a movie with a message, and I can tell you now, it's not a constructive one. It's not one that's really worth engaging with. But again, it is a revealing one about those who have embraced it as such. As the opening establishing shot tells us, this movie takes place in Europe. Not any specific country, mind you, just generic Europe. It was apparently shot in Croatia, and some people have inferred that this must then also be where the story takes place, but this is never actually established as far as I could tell. In fact, it felt like the movie was going out of its way not to specify a particular country, which was one of the first things that I thought was kind of weird. Like, even the license plates don't label a specific country as they should, you know, like Dutch or Polish or French. Instead, they just read EU, which I'm pretty sure does not exist. The newscaster who we hear throughout the movie speaks British English and kind of sounds like Bridget Jones.
Her mother was murdered in broad daylight in front of her child by another suspected undocumented migrant.
Which initially had me thinking we were in the UK, but with the EU license plates, I guess that's no longer an option. All the other characters speak English too, but they do have generic accents that hint at this being a non-English country anyways. Like the cop who's hunting the vigilante.
I am here to support local and federal law enforcement.
But even here, instead of being with a national police force, again the movie is keeping it deliberately vague by having him be from the International Interpol Agency. He also has this unintentionally funny line at one point where he's like,
As much as I love Europe and its deep history.
Now, as someone who also loves Europe and its deep history, I also know that no one here talks like that. Except maybe when they're talking to Americans. And that's when it hit me. This movie is not actually set somewhere in Europe, it's more like an American's idea of what Europe is like. And more specifically, a far-right American's idea of what Europe is like. And this made a lot of things make a lot more sense. Like the way it sets up the status quo of Europe as this declining continent that's being overrun by violent illegal immigrants. And where women and children no longer dare to go outside, and where official institutions no longer have the capacity nor the will to protect the innocent. Even if this touches on real-life issues, and I'll get to that in a moment. What you have to understand here is that from its basic premise, from the basic elements of its world building, what's being constructed here is little more than a straw man. Like, this is not a movie that's responding to reality, it's a fantasy that reflects only what Europe already is in the eyes of the far right. And this only becomes more problematic as the movie goes on.
Not only the young girl is the victim, they're also victims.
Because in
You really believe that?
not only the victim, also the perpetrators getting traumatized.
There was something off about this movie that I couldn't quite place my finger on at first, especially about the way the targets of the vigilante would behave and speak. It was like everything they said, every motivation that they offered, just didn't feel believable or true to real life. And at one point I realized that because this movie is one big obvious strawman, it also just doesn't have any subtext whatsoever. Like, every antagonist just says the quiet part out loud. Or more precisely, they all say explicitly what the far right normally hears subtextually in real life. So, for example, the judge who is deemed too lenient in his sentencing will here explicitly state that he believes violent criminals are just misunderstood victims.
The gang rape was in a way a cry for help and structure.
And similarly, the Muslim family here will explicitly affirm they want to enforce Sharia law and that European girls who wear short skirts deserve to be assaulted.
And just make boys horny with their mini skirts. They show their legs and breasts.
Like, every target of the vigilante openly announces the exact malevolent motivation that the far right already attributes to them, and which in turn then also functions as the legitimization for the violence against them. You know, it's like if an animal rights activist makes a movie about the untold truth of farming and then shows the farmer going like, ah yes, I love torturing my animals, I love seeing my bacon suffer before I eat it. Like, that's not how real life functions. Again, you're just creating obvious straw men. You're not uncovering anything about the world, you're only revealing what you have already projected onto it. And I think that when people condemn this movie and deem it racist or harmful, this is the real reason why. It's not because they want to deny the problems that the movie wants to address, it's not because they want to bury the truth or whatever. No, it's because the movie is pretending to do something which it isn't. Like, Citizen Vigilante is not actually interrogating the state of European society, it's merely dramatizing an already preconceived worldview about it. And the thing is, and this might be somewhat controversial to the other end of the political spectrum, but when it comes to the actual issues that are being portrayed here, you know, issues such as mass immigration and integration, and even questions of our desired national identity and demographic constitution and so on, I actually do believe all these should be up for socio-political debate. I think we should be able to talk about this, but again, what we see here just isn't that. Citizen Vigilante is more like the observation of a 15-year-old who just discovered 4chan. It's a reflexive revolt against a self-constructed and immature caricature of reality. It's not questioning or even engaging with anything really. It's just an expression of undigested sentiment, which is something that we also see embodied by the main character.
If you let them shower and it gets hot, the steam builds up. And you get mold in the room.
To me, the characterization of the vigilante was probably the most surprising aspect of this movie. Because while I went in expecting to see a prototypical far-right hero who distinctively targets non-Western migrants and woke liberals, you know, someone who fulfills the violent fantasy that the far-right has about them, on first impression the character actually feels a lot more generic. Because like, sure, there's violent undocumented migrants right here from the beginning. And sure, the movie ultimately hones in on illegal immigration and on the system that supposedly supports it, which also includes cops and liberal judges and the blindsided woke left and so on, as the main source of the evil that's ruining Europe.
This is an unfriendly takeover by the Islamist extremists and the blindsided woke left.
But the vigilante's zone of interest is also distinctively shown as being much wider than this. He also targets mobsters, and this group of violent youngsters of diverse ethnicities and genders, and even some white guys trying to drug women.
Sleepy time.
In this sense, you would almost argue that he's not actually a political agent, but just your typical guy who's fed up with the world in general. Someone who, while being flavored with a far-right sauce, really just captures that archetypical frustration with all crime and injustice that plagues our society.
If you grab a banana at a grocery store and you don't pay, eventually the cost of everything will go up. And that's not fair.
But just as this thought was forming in my brain, things were about to become even stranger. You see, normally the character that fulfills this archetype is also an embodiment of the values that are under attack. You know, he's a good man, a family man, he's a father, a husband, he's someone sympathetic who's then reluctantly forced into vigilantism after a personal tragedy. Like, that's the easy way to immediately establish moral legitimacy, right? This is how The Punisher and movies like Death Wish went about it. And while not necessarily being vigilantes, this is also how movies like Taken and John Wick legitimize their respective rampages. But interestingly enough, that's not the case here at all. No, the vigilante we are presented with here is unmarried, he has no children, he has no real personality or notable history or internal substance of any kind. All we know is that he visits prostitutes, he thinks soldiers who die for their countries are dumb, and this is probably the most baffling reveal of the movie, he's actually a wealthy American landlord who entered Europe illegally, is not a registered citizen here, has shady holding companies that hint at tax evasion, and who is frustrated because he cannot undermine the legal rights of his tenants when they have trouble paying rent.
People are stealing from me. It's unacceptable. Evict them immediately.
At first, all this kind of puzzled me. For a moment, I wondered if the movie was actually starting to critique its own hero by exposing his hypocrisies, and that maybe this critique was just lost on the far right who thinks he's cool anyways. But after thinking about it some more, it dawned on me that this characterization is not a contradiction at all. Like, I don't think that those who see the vigilante as a heroic figure do so in spite of his more questionable qualities. Rather, if anything, it's actually an extension of his more foundational essence. It dawned on me that the vigilante isn't someone who's just concerned about illegal immigrants or the future of Europe, and that he's also not someone who is merely frustrated with injustice in general. No, in some ways, he's something even worse, something that reveals what might just be the most troubling aspect about those who see him as an heroic ideal.
Smells like a nursing home in here. Let's get some fresh blood.
What the vigilante is someone who despises the basic premise of civil society itself. Like, it's not just moral complexity or moral weakness that he cannot deal with, it's the basic idea of living with other people as equals, and every nuance that comes with being part of a democratic collective in particular, that he rejects. Every democratic procedure, safeguard, and legal protection that in its essence serves to preserve individual rights and freedoms is experienced by him as an illegitimate obstacle whenever it limits his own immediate desires.
Well, the procedure is...
So if somebody doesn't want to pay, they get to live for free for 7 months.
He doesn't care about his tenants when they prevent him from maximizing his profits. He obviously doesn't care about state agents getting in his way. He doesn't even really care about the innocent people he claims to stand up for. He visits this one victim who wishes her attackers would go to jail, but to the vigilante this isn't good enough, and so he then basically forces her to give him the green light to do what he wants.
Do you want justice?
Also, there's this really strange scene where he's driving somewhere and wants to make a point about how people are just sheep who will obey the law even at their own expense, which he then demonstrates by driving a random person off the road.
Instead of just crossing the line and breaking the law and going into our lane, they went into a ditch and most likely died.
Besides this being a horribly ineffective way to make that point, like crossing into the other lane would have been a really dumb move here, the only thing he truly demonstrates in this scene is that he's just completely careless about anything or anyone beside himself. Like, if you've ever worked at like a municipal desk or some other kind of customer service job, the vigilante is the embodiment of the absolute worst type of guy you can encounter there. You know, he's the guy who scoffs at having to go through the normal procedures, or who gets angry with you when he has to fill out a form instead of immediately getting what he wants. Like, that's the kind of guy we're dealing with here. It's just an utterly egocentric and juvenile worldview.
It is time to go out and show these fuckers that they aren't getting away with it anymore.
And what I think is so revealing about this guy still being revered so much is that it demonstrates just how far beyond we are from mere conservative ideals of the nuclear family or even of the nation state. Like, the vigilante doesn't really stand for any aspirational ideal or a romanticized past. He doesn't offer real meaning or purpose. No, in the end, while he seems to give a final empowering message about us no longer having to be a victim and having to take back control, the only thing he really does is validate resentment and ignorance. He offers a warped image of reality and then tells you to double down on it. He tells you that everything is already exactly as you believe it is, that every perceived enemy, every perceived corruption, and every perceived societal weakness is legitimate, that every single frustration you have is legitimate, and that every act in response to it is justified.
I do this for you until you learn to do it for yourself.
Just to emphasize it once more, Citizen Vigilante doesn't respond to reality, it distorts it into a self-serving and self-delusional object that serves to gratify personal resentment. This is why I think it resonates so strongly with the far right, because it's a movie that mirrors exactly how so many of them are already experiencing reality. And this, I think, also explains the painful dissonance between the way both the movie and its fans claim to care about victims of sexual abuse, while also enabling the actual perpetrators that do the victimizing. There's this incredibly awkward moment in that one scene where the vigilante visits the sexual assault victim and then tries to talk her out of going through the normal system of justice because It would only lead to a needlessly long trial during which her credibility will be attacked.
In a room full of people who are going to call you a liar and try to poke holes in every detail of your story.
You know, it's genuinely hard to imagine fans of this movie watching this with a straight face, as if this is not exactly what the far right so often does and has so often done to sexual assault victims when the accused perpetrator is someone they identify with. Or, you know, when he's the leader of their political cult. This is also why Armie Hammer's casting, an actor who was cancelled because of sexual assault allegations, is not just tolerated here, but championed. Armie Hammer did nothing wrong. He was treated unfairly and should never have been cancelled. The comeback is just another reason to celebrate Citizen Vigilante's success. That's why figures like him, who have been accused or convicted of sexual misconduct, continue to find refuge within the far right. It's because ultimately they don't care about victims. They don't really want women and children to be safe. They're just abstract objects to them that are exploited for what truly matters, which is the continued fueling of their resentment. And this resentment, in its most extreme form, goes beyond Muslims and violent migrants. It goes beyond even the frustration with civil society and democratic values. In its most extreme form, and which I feel is what this movie ultimately demonstrates, this deep resentment, this thing, this beast, is becoming something much darker and much more all-consuming. After Citizen Vigilante went viral, some people joked about how the far right now has to champion an obviously bad movie from one of our worst filmmakers, as to pretend it's good and important. But to me, it just speaks to the deeper tragedy that the followers of MAGA or the far right, or however you want to label these destructive authoritarian movements, ultimately go through. The way they have to continuously humiliate themselves in increasingly absurd displays of submission, have to keep rationalizing the increasingly deranged whims of their obviously corrupt, narcissistic, and amoral leaders, have to surrender every semblance of critical thought and morality in favor of increasingly transparent lies and growingly bizarre false realities, and even having to perform enthusiasm about doing so. Which indeed includes having to pretend that an Uwe Boll movie is actually good and important. But this, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg, just another small sacrifice in what in the end is nothing less than the complete disintegration of the self. For me at least, this is something that past stories of authoritarianism have kind of failed to truly prepare me for. Just how utterly tragic it really is to see other human beings being hollowed out like that. How utterly tragic it is to see grown adults roll over in such blatant submission to those in power, even as those in power are so obviously and so shamelessly exploiting them for all that they are, leaving ever more victims in their wake, and burning down all that was good and beautiful. I think this is also why they don't mind that the vigilante is a cruel, wealthy landlord with no family or character. Because when all else is gone, such a void of a figure is the only source from which they can still vicariously draw purpose and meaning. Because when all else is gone, their blind submission to power is all that they have left. I had a few more thoughts that I couldn't quite fit into the video, mainly about the backfiring of the movie being banned, about the more general consequences of cancel culture, in which I also question if there's maybe a failing on our part in preventing disgraced actors from ending up in the hands of the far right, and about what Israel has to do with all this. You can find them all as a postscript in the extended version of this video that you can watch right now exclusively on Nebula. Nebula is our creator-owned streaming service that is home to a wide variety of amazing creators. If you want more societal examinations like this one, I'd also highly recommend Big Jules' exclusive Nebula video on Jordan Peterson's strange Jubilee appearance, and Lindsay Ellis her evaluation of the current state of South Park in a world that feels like it's already beyond parody, which can also be watched only on Nebula. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to discover here, from history channels to travelogues, game shows, movie critiques, and much, much more. It's all completely ad-free, made by actual human beings, and all this for the low price of just $2.50 a month if you sign up using my personal link. So if you want to see my extended thoughts on Citizen Vigilante and discover a great platform while you're at it, then be sure to claim my code for a big 50% discount on a yearly subscription, which also directly supports my channel, by the way, so thank you very much. And head on over to Nebula right now. I'll see you there.